What is going on, everybody? What is going on? The Catch fam, my name is John Dawson, and in today's video, we will be breaking down our must-add waiver wire additions heading into week 2 of the 2023 fantasy football season. If you guys are new to the channel, all we do here is free fantasy football content all year round. Redraft, Dynasty, and Best Ball. If you're into that, be sure to subscribe on the way in. Other than that, if you guys have any comments, questions, concerns moving into week 2 of the season, be sure to drop them down below. I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Any fantasy football questions you guys have, I am happy to help with. We've got a lot of players to go over because week 1 was an absolute mess, so let's not waste any time. Let's get through this as quick as possible. Let's hop into our week 2 waiver wire additions. All right, number 1 overall, I've got Kenneth Gainwell, a player I talked about a ton moving into the season. So Gainwell overall 14 carries, caught all 4 of his targets, 74 total yards. But when we look at Rashad Penny as a healthy scratch, last minute healthy scratch, and then DeAndre Swift's abysmal performance, don't get me wrong, we could see this backfield kind of go back and forth at times, but Kenneth Gainwell is absolutely going to be a running back who is going to be involved for the Philadelphia Eagles, which even though they went up against a tough New England defense and didn't have the best overall day, is still a very good offense. Going into next week, he gets the Minnesota Vikings. It's a great matchup. Gainwell is a priority waiver wire add heading into week 2. All right, sticking with the running back position, we've got Justice Hill of the Baltimore Ravens, who at the end of the day, after J.K. Dobbins unfortunately had to depart the game, and now that we know that J.K. Dobbins does have an Achilles tear and will miss the entire season, Justice Hill looks like the running back that the Ravens had the most trust in. We saw a little bit of Gus Edwards in this game as well, but at the end of the day, Justice Hill, 8 carries, just 9 yards, but of course 2 touchdowns off of those 8 carries. So at the end of the day, yeah, both these guys are worth taking a look at, but I'm going to roll with Justice Hill because he looks like he's got the hot hand right now. They get Cincinnati next week, who, you know, really struggled in week 1. Justice Hill, a player we absolutely have to consider moving into week 2. All right, next up, we've got KYREN Williams of the Rams. Okay, listen, Cam Akers is still going to be involved. He still got in the end zone. But at the end of the day, Williams was just out there vulturing touchdowns. Ended the day with 2 total touchdowns, a team high 52 yards on 15 carries. And Akers, you know, still 22 carries, 29 yards, and a touchdown. But still, Williams looks like he's going to be a part of this offense that, I mean, we know was down their best offensive player in Cooper Kupp. So what's Sean McVay going to draw up week to week? I don't quite know, but Williams was involved enough in week 1, had enough fantasy points that we ultimately need to add him moving into week 2. All right, 4th overall, I've got Tyler Allgeier, who's still owned in about 55% of Yahoo leagues overall. But at the end of the day, even with Bijan Robinson, you know, kind of shining in his rookie debut, Tyler Allgeier was still heavily involved. 18 touches, 93 yards on the ground, 2 total touchdowns. We talked about this throughout the offseason. Like, Bijan's going to be the guy. We love Bijan, et cetera, et cetera. But Allgeier still has standalone value and is a phenomenal handcuff. So check in your leagues, especially if you're not in a super deep league. Allgeier, one of the best handcuffs you can pick up. At the same time, looks like the Falcons are committed to the run as expected with Arthur Smith. I mean, Drake London, Kyle Pitts did nothing in this game. That won't happen every single week, but ultimately, you guys can see why Allgeier is a priority waiver wire add moving into week 2. All right, moving to the wide receiver position, we've got PUKA NACUA, a player that we talked about quite a bit, especially, you know, when we were talking about dynasty formats throughout the offseason, but we just alluded to Cooper Kupp being out of this offense for the Rams, and a lot of us thought, well, Van Jefferson's the easy player to go ahead and pluck in, but NACUA absolutely stepped up to the plate. He had a great game. Caught 10 of 15 targets for 120 yards, so full PPR formats had a good fantasy outing. And look, it looks like Matthew Stafford and NACUA have a good chemistry going. So even if Cooper Kupp is able to come back, I still like NACUA moving forward. He looked like the best wide receiver on the field against the Seahawks. He is a guy who's probably available in majority of your leagues unless you play in a dynasty format. He is absolutely worth adding. We've got to eat up the shares of this Sean McVay offense while we can get him, and NACUA definitely is going to be a big part of this offense moving forward. He is a priority waiver wire add moving into week 2. All right, we absolutely have to mention Romeo Doubs, a player that got dropped in a lot of leagues last minute because of, the news that he was going to be on a pitch count, still dealing with the hamstring injury. But I loved Romeo Doubs going into this matchup. I was a little bit more worried after the pitch count thing came out, but still, Romeo Doubs, we talked about him a lot throughout the offseason, one of my favorite late round wide receivers to go in and grab, and that showed the chemistry between him and Jordan Love showed. This Packers offense looked good. Doubs finished the day catching 4 passes, including 2 touchdowns, finished with 18.6 fantasy points. Yeah, maybe it looks a little bit different when Christian Watson comes back. We'll find out, but ultimately, Doubs is a player that we have to add as we approach week 2. All right, next up on the list, I've got Kendrick Bourne, which really kind of surprised me. Not ultimately, we heard some rumblings of this moving into the week, but I mean, I was a big Kendrick Bourne fan going into last season. I had a lot of shares of him at Best Ball, so I just wasn't listening to the noise, and oh my gosh, he absolutely stepped up to the plate with Devontae Parker not playing in this game against a good Eagles unit as well. He caught 6 of 11 targets, which was a team high, 64 total yards, 2 touchdowns. Ultimately, you got to take a shot on him. He gets Miami next week. Not the best matchup, but hey, not the worst either. We know Xavier Howard might line up on him. We'll find out. Maybe lines up on Juju. But the Miami Dolphins just gave up a ton of points to the Chargers. They are a team that will allow points to be put up. Kendrick Bourne, maybe we don't overreact, put him in our starting lineup and expect those points again. But he's a player who's worth being on your bench moving into week 2. All right, next up, we've got Rashid Shaheed. Let's go. Another player I absolutely loved in late rounds moving into the season. So this didn't really shock me when he had a better day than Michael Thomas. He caught 5 of 6 targets for 89 yards and a touchdown. He also had 2 runs for 11 yards. He's an explosive player, a change of pace type guy. Olave got a little dinged up in this game. We know Michael Thomas's history as well. Listen, I like Shaheed best when Chris Olave and MT are on the field. I think he's going to operate and play to his most potential that way. But still, we know what Shaheed is. Kind of a boomer bust. Nice flex play at times. He's a player who should be added and stashed on your bench moving into week 2. All right, one more running back to consider is going to be Tank Bigsby, who's still available in a good amount of leagues. I mean, according to Yahoo, he's still only owned in 46% of fantasy leagues. So, he vultured that 1 touchdown from Travis Etienne is the main reason we're taking a look at him. He had a lost fumble as well, which was an issue in the preseason. So, I mean, I think he's going to continue to be worked in, going to take away some fantasy value from Travis Etienne here and there. But the big thing here is he's still a great handcuff. And if you're in a situation where maybe you're not feeling fully confident in the running backs that you drafted, Tank Bigsby is a guy you can throw on the bench, stash for now. And we saw a little bit of fantasy value out there against the Colts in week 1. He gets 2 pretty good matchups moving forward. He gets Kansas City in week 2 and then Houston in week 3. So I do like Tank Bigsby's potential. We're not really going to, be throwing him into our starting lineups, but maybe in that week 3 matchup next to Travis Etienne, he does see some fantasy value again. And God forbid anything happen to Travis Etienne, Bigsby will still get RB1 value. So this is more of a handcuff move, but the touchdown was promising in week 1. Bigsby, a good stash moving into week 2. Another wide receiver here is going to be Rashee Rice of the Chiefs. Obviously caught the touchdown against the Lions in week 1, but I think the important thing to note here is the poor play of Kadarius Toney and the pretty poor play of Sky Moore as well. I mean, things are going to change once Travis Kelce's back in the mix, but you have to think there's a big potential here for Rashee Rice to become a guy that Patrick Mahomes trusts on a regular basis. So I do like Rashee Rice. I mean, 3 of 5 targets, 29 yards, and a touchdown. Not a crazy stat line, but in full PPR, double digits. And like I said, the potential for trust with Patrick Mahomes building is huge. So even if he ends up on your bench, Rashee Rice, a player that is worth adding moving into week 2. All right, another wide receiver here. We got Zay Jones of the Jacksonville Jaguars, owned in about 30% of leagues according to Yahoo, and I absolutely think Zay Jones is worth adding. Listen, this offense is, going to have weeks where Calvin Ridley really shines. Zay Jones, flies out of the radar. And at times, I still think Christian Kirk is going to have some really good games. Don't panic if you own Christian Kirk. But nonetheless, this offense with Trevor Lawrence at quarterback is going to be able to support multiple wide receivers and Evan Ingram and even Travis Etienne catching passes. I know week 1 wasn't as good as maybe we expected it to be, but this offense is still going to be very, good this year. Getting back to Zay Jones, he caught 5 of 7 targets for 55 total yards and a touchdown. And man, that touchdown was very impressive. So Zay Jones, probably a good flex option against soft matchups moving forward. That's about it, but he is absolutely worth adding to your bench moving into week 2. All right, moving on to the tight end position. Let's start with Hunter Henry, who had 5 catches against the Philadelphia Eagles for 56 total yards and a touchdown. I mean, you know, Hunter Henry is a very talented guy. He gets a good matchup against Miami next week. I mean, once again, just the type of team that we hope we're going to see a lot of fantasy involvement against on a regular basis like we saw in week 1. So Hunter Henry, not my favorite option, but listen, a lot of you guys out there struggling at tight end. We saw a lot of injuries pop up in week 1 before week 1 even started. So Hunter Henry, a good stat line in week 1. Hopefully the Patriots can keep up that pace. I do like him moving into week 2. All right, one more tight end. I'm going to go with Hayden Hurst, who caught 5 of 7 targets for 41 yards and a touchdown. So, I mean, I think a good, dependable veteran player in Hayden Hurst, starting to gain some chemistry and trust with a first-year quarterback in Bryce Young. Listen, Hurst is still going to be touchdown dependent, you know, and we just talked about Hunter Henry. He's probably going to be touchdown dependent as well. It's very rare that once we get into these type of tight ends, we're not really looking at touchdown dependent guys, but still, ultimately, Hayden Hurst, if you're hurting bad enough at tight end, is probably worth a look moving into week 2. All right, let's talk about 2 quarterbacks quickly. I'm going to start with Jordan Love, 31% rostered overall at the moment. Finished the day with 23 fantasy points, 27 passing attempts, 15 completions, 245 passing yards, 3 total passing touchdowns. He looked in sync, looked like he was comfortable in this offense, looked like he had good chemistry with the players who were available. Plus, we're going to get Christian Watson back at some point. He's got a favorable matchup in week 2 against the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, they looked good in week 1, but that was against Bryce Young. Jordan Love, Matt LaFleur as a head coach. I mean, they were on the road against Chicago in week 1, on the road next week. I think they'll be just fine. Hopefully we see Watson out there. If not, it looks like the Packers are going to be okay. Probably want to monitor Aaron Jones and his situation. Got a little dinged up in this game, and he really seemed to be, you know, continuing to be a big part of this offense and helped out Jordan Love quite a bit in this game. But ultimately, I talked about Jordan Love as a solid streaming option going into week 1. At this point, he's going to be rostered in a lot more leagues as we approach week 2. All right, another quarterback I talked about as a solid streaming option moving into week 1 was Brock Purdy, who had 16.8 fantasy points against Pittsburgh, 220 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 20 total rushing yards. Listen, he played well, didn't play great, doesn't have a crazy high ceiling, threw 2 touchdowns in the first half. Probably should have thrown for more in the second half, but the way this offense runs, once they're up, I mean, they just hand it off to Christian McCaffrey, and they play defense afterwards. So hopefully in more competitive game scripts, we continue to see more out of Brock Purdy. He gets the Rams next week. We don't want to underestimate them like most of us did in week 1, but ultimately this should be a good matchup before he gets the Giants and the Cardinals in the following week. So I'm a fan of Brock Purdy. I've been a fan of Brock Purdy going into the season, and I think moving into week 2, he's one of the better quarterback options who should be available in your league as we approach the week. And that'll do it for today's video. There are your top priority ads on the waiver wire moving into week 2. Like I said at the beginning of the video, if you guys are new to the channel, all we do here is free fantasy football content all year round. So if you found today's video helpful, be sure to subscribe on the way out. But other than that, guys, any fantasy football questions that you guys have, redraft, dynasty, best ball, starts, sits, waiver wire questions, trades, panic, whatever it may be, let me know in the comments down below. I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can. And with that, I will say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.